When people talk about trust, they treat it like some grand, unshakable monument, built once strong enough to last a lifetime. I used to believe that too. I thought trust was simple. Love someone, and you'll trust them. But life doesn't. Hand out guarantees. Trust is fragile, made up of thousands of tiny moments stitched together. And when one thread unravels, the whole thing can fall apart. Claire and I had been married for 6 years. She was everything I admired. Driven, smart, independent. The kind of woman who made heads turn when she walked into a room, not because of her looks, though she was stunning, but because she carried herself like someone who knew where she was headed. She worked for a major consulting firm and traveled constantly. I wasn't the jealous type. I was proud of her success, and I didn't mind holding down the fort while she climbed the corporate ladder. Meanwhile, I ran a modest woodworking business from home. Some guys I knew in college became lawyers or tech executives, but I'd always loved working with my hands, watching raw, unfinished wood transform into something beautiful. Claire always said she admired that about me. She called my workshop the place where order defeats chaos. Life was good, or at least I thought it was. It all started with something small, like most things do. Claire was prepping for another long business trip. Her suitcase lay open on the bed, neatly packed as usual. She was methodical, with lists for everything: outfits, meetings, presentations. I sat by the bed, sipping my coffee and watching her move around like a whirlwind of purpose. "Which city is it this time?" I asked. Her hands paused over her blazer for just a second, a blink and you'll miss it hesitation. "San Diego," she said. I frowned. "I thought you said San Francisco last night." She laughed, brushing it off. "They all blur together sometimes. But yeah, San Diego, that's the client headquarters. That should have been enough for me. I mean, people make mistakes. We all forget things when we're rushing. But something about the way she said it sat wrong with me, like a chair with one uneven leg. Later that night, I stood by the window as she packed up her car. The suitcase looked heavier than usual, and when she hugged me goodbye, her grip was tight, too tight. "Take care of yourself," she whispered against my cheek. "You too," I said, confused by the sudden tenderness. Claire wasn't a particularly emotional person, not in the obvious ways. She showed her love by doing, organizing. Drips, bringing me lunch when I forgot to eat, sending me links to articles she thought I'd find interesting. But this goodbye felt different, almost final. I tried not to overthink it. When you love someone, you give them the benefit of the doubt. You remind yourself that trust is built over years, not shattered by a single odd moment. Still, as the days went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The first real crack appeared when I called her one evening after dinner. I'd just finished sanding a new coffee table and I was feeling good, accomplished. Claire didn't answer, which wasn't unusual during meetings, so I left a voicemail. "Hey, just checking in. Hope your day's going well. Miss you." An hour passed, then 2. Around 9 p.m. my phone lit up. It was Claire calling me back. Her voice sounded cheerful but distant, like she was trying too hard to sound normal. "Hey, babe," she greeted me. "Sorry, today's been a madhouse. How are you?" "I'm good," I said. "Just wanted to hear your voice. Where are you now?" She hesitated. Again, just for a beat. "Still at the client's office," she replied. "They wanted to go over the project scope one more time." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "That's dedication." "Yeah, well," she sighed. "You know how it is. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Love you." "Love you too." The call ended, but my mind didn't. There was a faint sound in the background, a hum I couldn't quite place. It didn't sound like an office. It sounded quieter, like a hotel room. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they had quiet meeting spaces. Maybe I was hearing things. But by the third night I noticed another odd pattern. Claire always called me at the same time, precisely 9 p.m., like clockwork, and the conversations felt rehearsed, predictable. Then there was her suitcase, When she got home from the trip, I noticed something strange. A shirt I didn't recognize, a men's dress shirt, neatly folded at the bottom of her luggage. "Whose shirt is this?" I asked, holding it up. She blinked as if she'd forgotten it was there. "Oh, that's mine," she said too quickly. "I borrowed it when I got cold during a meeting. You know how conference rooms are." I stared at her, trying to read between the lines of her explanation, but her face gave away nothing. The thing about trust is that it doesn't just shatter all at once. It frays. It wears thin under a weight of unanswered questions. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But for the first time, I found myself asking the one question I'd never thought I'd ask. What if everything I know about my wife isn't true? As I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling, I knew that this wasn't going to be one of those small worries that fades with time. It was a knot in my mind, a tangle of doubts pulling tighter with each passing day. And once that knot forms, it doesn't just unravel on its own. You have to pull it apart piece by painful piece. The next morning, the shirt was still on my mind. I tried to push it aside, telling myself that it was nothing, just a strange coincidence. Claire didn't seem like someone who'd lie to me. She'd always been the type to roll her eyes at drama, not create it. But that small, nagging voice in the back of my head wouldn't shut up. It whispered things I didn't want to hear. What if she's hiding more than just a borrowed shirt? I spent most of the day in my workshop, sanding down the frame of a bookshelf I'd been building for a client. The rhythmic scrape of the sandpaper usually calmed me, but this time it only gave my mind more space to wander. Every detail of the last few months replayed in my head. I remembered how Claire's trips had started to blur together. Shorter, notice longer absences. She used to send me pictures from her travels. Little things, a photo of the view from her hotel room, a snapshot of her lunch, but lately nothing, just vague one-line updates. "Busy day today, babe. Heading to a client dinner. Miss you." It was like she was trying to keep me at a distance while pretending everything was fine. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I wiped my hands on a rag, grabbed my phone, and opened Claire's social media. It was the same as it had always been, polished, professional, and impersonal. A photo from a work conference 6 months ago, a group picture at some team-building event. Nothing that told me who she really was when I wasn't around. Then I noticed something strange. Her most recent post was from 3 weeks ago, a shot of her standing in front of a sleek corporate building. The caption read, "Ready to kick off. Another exciting project." Claire was dressed perfectly as always, blazer, tailored pants, confident smile. But what caught my attention wasn't Claire. It was the reflection in the building's glass windows. There, just barely visible behind her, was a man. He was tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair. He stood just out of frame, facing Claire like he'd been talking to her when the photo was taken. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except for the way his body was turned slightly toward her, as if they were sharing something personal. I zoomed in, but the image was too blurry to make out his face. Still, something about it felt off. Claire rarely mentioned her co-workers, and when she did, it was never in a personal way. I didn't even know their names. I set my phone down, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe he was just a colleague, part of the same project. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Later that evening, I tried to bring it up. Casually, when Claire called. "Hey, how was your day?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Busy, but good," she said. Her voice sounded tired, but there was something else, something guarded. "That picture you posted, where was that taken?" There was a slight pause on the other end. "Which one?" "The one in front of the building, the new project." "Oh, that." Claire's laugh was quick and forced. "That was from last month. I didn't even realize I hadn't posted it until recently." "Looks like you weren't alone," I said, testing the waters. "Who was that guy in the background?" Her response was almost too fast. "Oh, that's just Mark. He's part of the client team. Nothing exciting." "Mark." I filed the name away in the Back of my mind. Got it, I said, forcing myself to sound unconcerned. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of the house, staring at the phone in my hand. My gut was screaming at me now, louder than ever. The way Claire brushed it off, it didn't feel like the truth. I thought back to the early days of our relationship. Claire used to tell me everything, what her co-workers were like, the little office dramas that played out during meetings. I knew when she was annoyed, when she was proud of herself, when she was struggling with a project. But now, it felt like there were whole pieces of her life I wasn't a part of. By the time I went to bed, I still didn't have any answers, just more questions. I stared at her empty side of the bed, the pillow still fluffed from the morning. In the middle of the night, I woke up in a cold sweat. I didn't know why. I hadn't been dreaming, at least not that I remembered, but I felt an overwhelming sense of unease, like the world was shifting beneath me. I sat up, ran a hand over my face, and grabbed my phone. I don't know what I expected to find, but I opened Claire's flight details. She always sent me her itinerary out of habit. I clicked on her return flight, and that's when I noticed it. The return flight wasn't from San Diego. It was from Austin. Austin! She hadn't mentioned Austin, not once. My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at the screen. There was no way this was a mistake. Claire was meticulous about everything. She never mixed up details like this. Suddenly, the shirt in her suitcase, the blurry reflection of the man in the photo, the perfectly timed phone calls, it all came together like jagged puzzle pieces, forming a terrible picture. Something was wrong, and I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. By the time morning came, my mind was made up. I couldn't keep sitting in the dark, guessing and second-guessing every word, every glance, every conversation. I needed answers. And if Claire wasn't going to give them to me, I'd find them myself. I sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the coffee maker filling the silence. Claire's return flight was scheduled for the end of the week. 5 more days. 5 days of pretending I wasn't unraveling inside. I scrolled through the flight details again. Austin. There was no logical reason for her to be there if her meetings were in San Diego. By the time my coffee was done, I'd made a decision. I was going to Austin. The idea sounded insane, even to me at first. I wasn't the kind of guy who did things like this. I'd always been steady, predictable, reliable, as Claire liked to say. But this situation wasn't normal, and pretending it would only drive me deeper into a spiral. Within an hour, I'd booked a last-minute flight. I packed light, just a backpack with the essentials. I wasn't sure what I'd find or how long I'd stay. All I knew was that I needed to see the truth with my own eyes. The flight felt endless, though it was barely 3 hours. I sat by the window, watching the clouds drift below like islands in an endless sea. My mind raced with possibilities, some outrageous, some painfully plausible. I kept coming back to one question. Why? Why would Claire lie to me? Why would she fly somewhere else entirely and not tell me? What part of her life had she carved out that I wasn't supposed to see? When the plane touched down in Austin, I felt the weight of the moment settle in my chest. The airport was busy, with the usual blur of travelers, families, business people, couples holding hands. I stood there for a moment, feeling strangely out of place among them. I wasn't here for a reunion or a vacation. I was chasing something I didn't even want to believe was real. Claire's itinerary said she was staying at the Westmont Hotel, a sleek modern building downtown. I caught a cab, and as we weaved through the streets, I rehearsed what I'd do when I got there. Would I confront her? No, not yet. I needed to be sure. The hotel lobby was polished marble and quiet conversations. I checked the digital directory near the elevators. Sure enough, her name was on the list. Claire W. checked in 2 nights ago. My stomach clenched. I took a seat in the corner of the lobby where I had a clear view of the main entrance. I told myself I'd wait. If Claire was really here, she'd show up eventually. And if she wasn't alone, well, that was what I needed to know. 2 hours passed. I nursed a coffee from the hotel cafe, pretending to be engrossed in my phone while my eyes stayed locked on the entrance. And then I saw her. Claire walked in, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in months, a relaxed, unguarded smile that made my heart ache. She looked radiant, wearing a simple dress that swayed as she moved. But it wasn't her appearance that hit me hardest. It was the man walking beside her. He was the same guy from the reflection in the photo, tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident ease to his stride. They walked close, their arms brushing together, like magnets. She leaned in as he spoke, laughing at something he said. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Everything slowed, the sound of footsteps, the hum of conversations. The world around me blurred, and all I could see was Claire with him. I should have stormed up to them, demanded an explanation. But I couldn't move. I sat frozen, watching as they passed the front desk and headed for the elevators. The doors closed behind them with a soft chime, and just like that they were gone. My mind was a storm of disbelief, fury, and gut-wrenching pain. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I knew I couldn't do it here, not like this. Instead, I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky beneath me. I walked to the front desk, my heart pounding in my ears. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "Can you tell me which room Claire W. is in? I'm her husband. There's been a mix-up with her luggage." The receptionist smiled politely. "Of course, sir. Let me check." She typed quickly, her fingers clicking against the keyboard. "Room 1508. "Thanks," I muttered. 15 floors. A small number, but it felt like Everest. I didn't know what I was going to do when I got there, but I knew one thing. I couldn't pretend anymore. Whatever life Claire was living, up here in Austin, it wasn't the life she shared with me. I stood in front of the elevator, watching the numbers climb as it ascended. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and hit the button for the 15th floor. Each ding of the passing floors felt like a countdown to something I wasn't ready for. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched out in front of me, empty and sterile. I found room 1508 at the end of the hall. The door was shut, a simple "Do Not Disturb" sign hanging from the handle. I reached out, my fingers hovering over the door for a moment before I knocked. No response. I knocked again, louder this time, still nothing. My pulse raced as I stepped back, debating whether to wait or walk away. Then the door next to me opened. An older woman with short grey hair peeked out. "Are you looking for Claire?" she asked kindly. I blinked. "Yeah, I am." The woman nodded sympathetically. She and her husband left about 10 minutes ago. They looked happy. Her husband. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. I mumbled a thank you and stumbled back down the hallway toward the elevator. By the time I reached the lobby, I could barely breathe. Claire wasn't just hiding things from me. She had an entirely different life, complete with another man who believed he was her husband. I stepped outside into the bright Austin sun, the heat pressing down on me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw Claire's name flash across the screen. I let it ring. Then, slowly, I slipped the phone back into my pocket and stared at the city in front of me. For the first time in my life, I felt completely untethered, adrift in a life I didn't recognize. And the only thing I knew for sure was that the truth was far worse than I ever imagined. I stood outside the hotel, feeling like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. Claire's call went to voicemail. I didn't bother listening to her message. It was probably one of the usual. "Just checking in, babe." The same script she always used, the same hollow words that now felt like a cruel joke. I needed space to think. My feet moved on autopilot, carrying me down the busy street while my mind tried to stitch together some kind of explanation. None of it made sense. How long had this been going on? How had I missed it? Claire, the woman I'd built my life with, had another husband. How many other lies had she told? A part of me wanted to turn around, march back up to that hotel room, and tear the truth out of her right then and there, but I knew I wasn't ready. Not yet. I found a quiet bench in a nearby park and sank down, letting the chaos of the city blur around me. Children laughed in the distance, joggers passed by, birds chirped in the trees, and yet none of it felt real. I was a ghost in my own life. I took out my phone, stared at the blank screen for a long moment, and then did something I never thought I'd do. I opened a private browser tab and typed Claire's full name, followed by the word Austin. The search results felt like a punch to the gut. There, near the top, was an article from a local business website. An interview featuring Claire Winters, executive consultant and keynote speaker for a regional tech conference. The picture was recent. Claire sat at a round table, smiling professionally at the camera. But the caption wasn't what I expected. It didn't mention our city, or the company she supposedly worked for. It listed her as an independent consultant, living in Austin. Living in Austin. I scrolled further and found another article, this one from 6 months ago. The headline read, "Local entrepreneur Claire Winters on work-life balance." Work-life. A balance. This irony wasn't lost on me. She'd built 2 lives and I wasn't part of this one at all. I clicked on her bio at the bottom of the article and the words hit me like bricks. Claire lives in Austin with her husband Michael. Michael. There was a name to go with the face now. The man I'd seen her walk into that elevator with wasn't just some co-worker or friend. He was her second husband. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the revelation sink in. My world had just split down the middle. The woman I'd shared my dreams with, the woman I'd trusted more than anyone, had built an entirely different existence, a life where I didn't even exist. I opened my eyes and stared ahead, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to do next. I booked a room at a small motel a few miles from downtown, someplace quiet where I could figure out my next steps. The room was simple, just a bed, a desk, and an outdated TV, but it was exactly what I needed. Once I was settled, I made a few calls. First, I called a friend from college, Ethan. He was a lawyer now, specializing in family law. "Martin," he answered, sounding surprised. "Man, it's been forever." "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Listen, I need some advice, and it's sensitive." "Of course." His tone shifted, serious now. "What's going on?" I hesitated before answering. Saying it out loud made it feel even more real. "I think Claire has another husband." There was a long pause. "Wait, what? Like, married to someone else?" "Yeah." Ethan let out a low whistle. "Jesus, Martin, that's serious. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," I muttered, glancing at the article still open on my laptop. "I saw them together. I found proof." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you want me to look into it? Find out if there's any legal documentation?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Please, I need to know everything. Is it even legal? Can someone be married to 2 people? "It's not legal," Ethan said firmly. "In fact, if she's done this intentionally, it could be considered fraud." Fraud. That word hit hard. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was living a lie that could get her arrested. "What should I do?" I asked, my voice cracking. There was a pause before Ethan replied. "First, gather everything you can. Emails, photos, anything that proves what's happening. And Martin, I hate to say this, but you might want to be careful. If she's been lying on this level, who knows what else she's capable of?" I closed my eyes, swallowing hard. "Yeah, thanks, Ethan." We hung up, and for a while, I just sat there staring at the screen. My life had become a twisted crime story, and I wasn't sure how it would end. The next morning, I made my way back downtown and parked near the hotel. I wasn't ready to confront Claire directly, but I needed more information. I found a small cafe with a good view of the entrance and ordered a black coffee, my stomach churning too much to eat. Around noon, I saw them again, Claire and Michael. They walked hand in hand down the street, laughing like any other couple. In love, my heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice. I followed from a distance, keeping my head down. They stopped at a trendy lunch spot, sat outside and ordered drinks. Claire looked so at ease, so different from the version of her I knew. It was like I was staring at a stranger who happened to have my wife's face. I stayed until they finished their meal and watched them walk toward a nearby park. They sat on a bench talking quietly, their hands intertwined. As I stood there, watching from the shadows, one thought echoed in my mind. Who is Claire really? And how much of our life together was ever real? I stayed hidden near the edge of the park, my eyes locked on Claire and Michael. They looked so comfortable together, like they'd been doing this for years. It wasn't just the hand-holding or the way she laughed at his jokes. It was the way she leaned into him, the small, unconscious gestures of someone deeply familiar, with another person. The reality of it hit me again, harder this time. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't some brief lapse in judgment. Claire had built an entire life around this man, a life I knew nothing about. As I watched them, questions flooded my mind. How long? How did she pull it off? Why him? Why lie to me for so long? But one question burned brighter than the rest. Was anything we had ever real? Michael reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind Claire's ear. She smiled softly and kissed him on the cheek. The sight of it felt like a knife to the chest. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms, grounding myself in the pain. I had to stay calm. I couldn't let anger control me. Not yet. When they stood and started walking back toward the hotel, I made my move. I waited near the back entrance of the hotel, where the alley met the side street. Claire had always been predictable about routines. She liked using side entrances to avoid crowded lobbies. Sure enough, a few minutes later, they turned the corner. I stayed out of sight until they reached the hotel door. Michael walked ahead to open it for her, and for just a second Claire lagged behind. It was my chance. Claire! Her name came out like a punch, sharp and raw. She froze mid-step. I saw her shoulders tense before she turned around, her eyes widening when she saw me. In that moment, I could see the mask she wore slip ever so slightly. Beneath the shock, there was something else. Fear. "Martin," she whispered, as if she couldn't believe I was real. Michael noticed her hesitation and looked back, his brow furrowed as he glanced between us. "Is everything okay?" he asked, his voice calm but cautious. Claire forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, I think I know him from work." "Work?" She was lying to his face without missing a beat. My stomach twisted, but I kept my voice steady. "No, Claire, we don't work together." I stepped closer, narrowing the distance between us. "I'm your husband." Michael's face went pale. "What?" Claire's composure shattered. She grabbed my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Martin, don't do this, please." I pulled my arm free, glaring at her. "Do what, Claire? Tell the truth. How long have you been living this double life?" My voice cracked with anger and betrayal. "How long have you been lying to me and to him?" Michael stepped forward, confusion etched across his face. "Claire, what is he talking about?" Her gaze darted between us, panicked. She reached for Michael's hand, as if trying to steady herself. "I can explain." "No," I interrupted. "No more lies. He deserves the truth. I deserve the truth." Michael's expression shifted from confusion to suspicion, and then to something closer to horror. "Claire, is this true? Are you married to him?" The silence stretched between us like a loaded gun. Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. The truth was too big to hide anymore, and we all knew it. Michael took a step back, his face crumbling. How could you do this?" His voice was barely a whisper, raw with disbelief. "You told me. You said you'd never been married before." Claire reached for him again, her eyes filled with tears. "Michael, please, I can explain everything." I let out a bitter laugh. "Explain? Claire, you've been living two lives. How do you explain that?" She turned to me, her expression shifting from desperation to something colder. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "You've never understood." That threw me off balance. "What the hell does that mean?" Claire wiped at her eyes, her shoulders trembling. "I've been under pressure my whole life, to be perfect, to succeed, to make everyone proud." She gestured helplessly. "I thought if I could divide the weight it would be easier. With you, I had safety. With Michael, I had excitement. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." I stared at her, stunned. "You weren't trying to hurt anyone?" I shook my head. "Claire, you tore my life apart. You've lied to me every single day. You built this whole illusion, and you think that makes it okay because it made your life easier?" Michael's face twisted with disgust. "I don't even know who you are." He stepped back again, distancing himself from her. Claire's breath hitched. "Michael, don't." But he was already walking away. "I need time to think." I watched as he disappeared down the street, leaving Claire standing there, broken and small. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The weight of everything hung between us, unbearable and final. Claire looked at me, her eyes glassy with tears. I didn't want it to end like this. I let out a shaky breath. Neither did I. The truth was out now, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of something I'd spent years building. Claire wiped her face, trying to compose herself. "What happens now?" I stared at her, feeling the last thread of my old life snap. "Now," my voice was steady, calmer than I expected. "Now I go home, and I start figuring out how to live without you." She flinched, but I didn't look back as I turned and walked away. By the time I reached my car, the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me hollow and exhausted. I sat behind the wheel, staring at the steering wheel as the weight of it all settled over me. I'd come to Austin searching for answers. I'd found them, but they weren't the ones I wanted. I wasn't sure what came next. I only knew that the life I thought I had was gone, and Claire had become a stranger, wearing the face of the woman I once loved. I started the car and pulled onto the road, heading toward the airport. It was time to go home, time to figure out what came next, one step at a time. The flight back home felt surreal, like I was floating outside of my own body. I watched the city of Austin disappear beneath the clouds, and for the first time in years, I felt weightless, but not in a good way. It wasn't freedom I felt, it was emptiness. The plane's hum drowned out everything except my thoughts. I kept replaying the look in Claire's eyes, first panic, then guilt, and finally that strange coldness. I'd spent years thinking, knew her, but now I wasn't even sure who Claire really was. When I landed and stepped into the terminal, the familiar sights of home felt distant. Families reunited with hugs, couples walked hand in hand, and here I was, standing alone with nothing but a carry-on, and the hollow realization that my marriage was a lie. I drove home in silence, the evening sky streaked with the fading light of sunset. The house came into view, the place Claire and I had built together. Every brick, every flower in the front yard, every picture on the walls. They all felt tainted now, like echoes of a life I no longer belonged to. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a while staring at the front door. This was the same house Claire would walk through in a few days, pretending everything was normal. The thought of her acting like nothing had changed made my blood boil, but I wasn't going to lose control. Claire had already taken enough from me. My trust, my stability, my belief in us. She wasn't going to take my dignity too. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. I dropped my bag by the door and wandered through the rooms in a daze. Everything was the same but different. The kitchen table where we used to have breakfast, the couch where we'd sit and binge-watch shows. It all felt like a stage set, and the actors had gone home. In the living room, I found Claire's sweater draped over the armrest. She'd left it there after our last movie night together. I picked it up, feeling the soft fabric between my fingers, and for a moment my resolve cracked. I sank onto the couch, clutching the sweater, memories crashing over me. The way she used to rest her head on my shoulder, the sound of her laugh when I said something dumb but sweet, how much of it had been real. Had she ever truly loved me, or was I just another piece in her carefully constructed puzzle? The weight of it all pressed down on me until I couldn't sit still anymore. I stood up, pacing the room like a man on the edge of a breakdown. I needed to do something, anything, to regain control of my life. That's when I remembered Ethan's words, "Gather everything you can." Proof. I grabbed my laptop and sat at the dining table, opening Claire's email account. I knew her password. It hadn't changed in years. When her inbox loaded, my heart pounded. Most of the recent emails were innocuous: work updates, flight confirmations, receipts. But as I scrolled further, I found something that made my breath catch. An email from someone named Michael Tanner. The subject line read, "Last weekend." My stomach twisted as I clicked it open. "Claire, I've been thinking about you all day. Can't wait until we're back at our spot this weekend. Counting the hours. Love, Michael." The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago, right before her last business trip. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was undeniable proof. I scrolled further and found dozens of emails like it, stretching back months. Some were short, just quick notes saying he missed her. Others were longer, filled with plans for future weekends, photos of them together. At some lakeside cabin, inside jokes I didn't understand. I felt like I was reading someone else's love story, one where I didn't exist. My hand hovered over the mouse, trembling with rage and heartbreak. Part of me wanted to delete every email, to erase their secret world out of sheer spite, but I didn't. I needed these emails, not for revenge, but for clarity, for proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I created a folder on my desktop and saved every damning message. Once I was done, I closed the laptop and sat back, staring at the ceiling. She hadn't just lied. She'd built a life with another man right under my nose. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My body was heavy, weighed down by exhaustion and emotional fatigue, but there was no escaping what came next. Claire was due to come home in 2 days, and I needed to be ready. I wasn't going to sit in this house, waiting for her to waltz back in like nothing had happened. Instead, I called Ethan again. "Martin." His voice was groggy, probably still half asleep. "Sorry to call so early," I said, "but I need your help." "No worries." He paused. "Did you find something?" "Yeah," I said bitterly. "Emails, photos, everything." Ethan was silent for a moment. "Okay, listen, we can go 2 ways with this. If you want to file for divorce, the proof you have will make a strong case. But if you're looking for something else, like legal action for fraud, that's trickier. It depends on how far she went." I rubbed my temples, trying to fight off the pounding headache. "I don't even know what I want yet. I need to understand why she did this." Ethan sighed. "Sometimes there's no satisfying answer, man. Sometimes people lie because they can." I swallowed hard, the truth of his words cutting deep. "Thanks, Ethan," I muttered. "I'll figure it out." After I hung up, I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the weight of the last few days. When I stepped out and looked at my reflection in the mirror, I barely recognized the man staring back. My face was pale, my eyes hollow, and the familiar spark of confidence I'd once had was nowhere to be found. But I wasn't broken, not yet. Claire would walk through that door soon enough. And when she did, I'd be ready to hear the truth, even if it destroyed what little was left of us. The day Claire came home, I didn't say much. I let her talk, watched her try to salvage whatever scraps of trust she thought still existed. She cried, apologized, and spun stories about pressure and identity, about how she wasn't trying to hurt anyone, that she just wanted to feel whole in a way she never could with only one life. But as she spoke, I realized something. I wasn't listening for her explanations anymore. I'd spent so long waiting for answers, convinced that if I understood why she did it, the pain might lessen, that maybe I could move past it. But the truth didn't heal me. It only deepened the wound. When Claire finally stopped talking, I looked at her, the woman I'd once loved so completely, and I felt nothing but the cold, quiet ache of loss. I asked her to leave that day, and she did. No fights, no grand gestures, she just walked out the door, and in her absence the silence of the house felt louder than ever. It's been months now, the divorce papers are signed. The house feels emptier without her, but I've slowly started to make it mine again, rearranging furniture, taking down photos, painting the walls a different color. Small things that help me remember that life can be rebuilt, even after it's been torn apart. But there are still days when the memories catch me off guard. When I walk past the cafe where we had our first date, or see an old text thread and feel that familiar pang of grief. Because losing someone you love isn't just about losing them, it's about losing the life you thought you were building together. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on what happened, trying to piece together who I am without Claire. And in that quiet, I've learned some things about trust, about love, and about myself. I used to believe that trust was something you gave completely or not at all. That once you handed it over, it was solid, unchanging. But I know now that trust isn't a single, unbreakable promise. It's 1,000 small moments built up over time, fragile and precious. And when it's shattered, it can't always be put back together. I've thought about whether I could ever trust someone again, whether I'd be willing to take that leap of faith. And while I'm not sure I'm ready yet, I know this: trust isn't about being blind to someone's flaws or ignoring your doubts. It's about being brave enough to let someone in, even knowing that they might hurt you. And if they do, you survive, you endure, you rebuild. I've also thought a lot about Claire, not just about what she did, but about who she was. I used to think she was perfect, but that was never true. She was complicated and flawed, torn between the life she wanted and the life she thought she was supposed to live. And while I can't forgive what she did, I can understand the fear that drove her. But understanding doesn't mean excusing. I've let go of the anger, though. Not for her, for me. Carrying that weight only chained me to the past. Letting it go was the only way to move forward. There's a quiet strength in starting over. My life is smaller now in some ways. Quieter, but it's mine again. I spend more time in my workshop, creating things with my hands, tables, shelves, small projects that remind me that something broken can become something beautiful again. I've started taking long walks in the mornings, breathing in the crisp air, watching the world wake up. I've begun to notice the small moments of peace I used to overlook, and sometimes, in that stillness, I feel a strange sense of gratitude, not for the pain, but for the lessons it left behind. When I think about love now, I don't see it as a storybook ideal or a flawless partnership. Love is messy, it's imperfect, and it requires courage. Not just the courage to trust someone else, but the courage to trust yourself, to believe that even after heartbreak, you're still worthy of something real. I don't know what the future holds. Maybe someday I'll meet someone new, maybe I'll fall in love again, or maybe I won't. But what I do know is this: I'll never lose myself trying to fit into someone else's idea of what life should be. I've learned that the only life worth living is the one where you're honest, with yourself and with the people you choose to let in. And if there's one thing I'll carry with me from this, it's the knowledge that even when the threads of your life unravel, you can weave something new, something stronger, something your own. I still see Claire sometimes, in memories, in dreams that linger when I wake up. And while there's a part of me that will always wonder if things could have been different, I've made peace with the fact that they weren't. Some knots, no matter how tightly woven, aren't meant to hold. But that doesn't mean you can't untangle yourself and start again. Because life isn't about the threads you lose, it's about the ones you choose to hold on to.